His early life, in fact, he was born in Molokai, Hawaii, way back in September of 1904. So he'd be over 100 today if he were alive. His parents came over. She was 8 months pregnant, his mother, and sailed to a little spot on the backside of Cooney. I don't remember the name of it, but it's,
well, you don't have to remember.
It's a valley in Molokai, and settled down, and were befriended by a man and a wife by the name of Mr. and Mrs. Johnny Wilson, former mayor of Honolulu, eventually. But anyway, they took them into their homes, made them comfortable, and this is where my dad was born, in their home. And the story goes that Johnny, who had no children at that time, wanted to know if Grandma would be willing to give up her firstborn. And Grandpa's reply was, well, if it's a girl, okay. But it happened to be my dad, so I guess he kept him. And so this went on, and until there was a typhoid outbreak. And so Johnny and his wife hurried my dad and his mother and father to the the ship to go to the United States. And then they ended up in Reno, Nevada. They were there for probably a couple of years, and then came on over to California, where they had heard that there was good farming and a better place to raise a family. So at that point, they ended up in a place near Florin, California. And then, to my understanding, there were other Tsukamotos that were living there at that time. And we don't happen to be related at all. And Mario, you're one of them. We are not related to. But anyway, that's where he grew up. And worked in, as he grew up, he went to an elementary school in Sacramento, Lincoln, and through Sacramento High School. That's where he graduated. And during all those years, he had to work to earn money to save for a future education, because that was #1 priority in his life. In those days, young people grew up quickly. But having lived with my parents, we didn't grow up quickly. We were pampered, and we didn't have to worry about too much. And so, but anyway, once he graduated from high school, he went to University of California, where he was accepted. I guess he went 3 years, I think, pre-law, and was accepted immediately into Bolt Hall. He was also in the ROTC program for 4 years, and earned a commission. I think it was major or something like that. But anyway, so through those years at Bolt, he graduated and passed the bar immediately, came to Sacramento, and started his law practice. He met my mom, Tomoe, Kasai was her name, and they were at college. But it was hard for my mother to get away to meet him because Grandpa was pretty strict. And so when Dad graduated from law school and came to Sacramento, they eloped because Grandpa was never going to forgive them if they got married, but they did. They got married, and Grandpa never forgave them for many years. But he didn't like lawyers, that's why. And so, well, that's what I heard anyway. And so then, after that, they settled down in Sacramento, bought a house on Vallejo Way. In fact, I know the address. It's 1800 Vallejo Way. And it was a brick home that he had built near elementary school that was Crocker Elementary, and high school, McClatchy, and then Sacramento City College. And so he had, you know, bright ideas that this would be a perfect place to raise your family. And it was, until the war broke out. Dad had to leave to go to Tule Lake, is where his place was to be sent during internment. First stop was Wallaroga, where the waiting, holding place until Tule Lake was ready for us. But there was a story about that I'm not sure about, and that was that he had such a clientele built up and knew so many people in the Sacramento area needing legal advice that he went along to camp with everybody else. He could have gone east because he had, you know, friends who could have helped him out. You know, before the internment, you were able to move east if you had some kind of sponsor or something to do. I know most people didn't want to go. They didn't know what they were expecting, but my dad could have gone if he wanted to. But so we all went to camp until we were only there for a good 7 months total, mainly because my dad used to be a Japanese American citizens president for years. You know, he was leader of Japanese Americans for, well, in the 30s, and until the war started. And so while he was in camp, of course, he was no longer any officer, but he was very active in helping out the JACL. And so then when they were going after certain, you know, some of the, you know, you can't blame people who are in camp for being angry, especially young people who were just about to start a life of their own, and then being put behind bars and not allowed to do anything, and their parents as well. And at the same time, during that period of time, the boys were encouraged to serve the country, to show their loyalty. And my dad was such a loyal man. He just loved this country so much that he felt that, excuse me, that he wanted to serve his country. You know, here he was an ROTC man and asked to join the armed forces. He wrote a good 6 to 7 letters to the government and rejected each time. Can you imagine? An American citizen who loved this country so much and wanted to serve. And so when it came time when the government decided that they wanted to use the boys of Japanese ancestry to serve the country, to serve in the armed forces, then Dad was accepted eventually. He was a good 38 years old at that time. So they had him go to, they sent him to Fort Snelling, Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he was in the MIS program. He spoke and read and Japanese fluently. And so they were able to use his expertise in teaching the boys some techniques of interrogation. And so he was at the rank of a captain at that point, and major. And when he was at Fort Snelling, he was, or Camp Savage, he maintained captain and major commission. And then when the war, that's when we were transferred over to Cincinnati because we couldn't go with Dad. So while he was in Minnesota, we were in Cincinnati, Ohio for about 3 years till the end of the war. And so, but all those years, people asked me, what do you think about, what was your relationship with him? And I said, well, very scattered, because he wasn't around much, and mainly because he was a leader and he was so busy trying to help out the Japanese Americans and fighting a lot of the laws that were in the legislature. He was a lobbyist. And so little time was spent at home. I guess he must have been exhausted. And of course, Mom and had these 5 little brats, and I'm telling you, they were brats, I'm included, and it was difficult. And so our relationship with Dad was, you know, I don't remember a lot. But he was a gentle person. He was not a person that was physically abusive. Maybe verbally on occasion, but hardly ever. Very soft-spoken, and I could not believe that this is my father that other people are talking about. A very outgoing and very aggressive type personality where he would go, but in a very gracious way. He made so many friends in the legislature, you know. They became friends. And so, but anyway, he did so much. It's just a long story about my dad. And my relationship with him was always happy. I remember as a little girl, we used to go swinging in the backyard, and he'd always reach over and try to tickle me. And so we used to have those kind of relationships whenever he was around. As I was growing up, after we got back from Cincinnati, he was transferred to Tokyo, Japan. So we all went along with him. Always a period of time when he'd go first, and then my mom would take the 5 children with her. So it must have been pretty tough for my mom, too. And she was a woman with a lot of grace. She was a very graceful person, and a born dancer, musician type. And she loved to go ice skating. She went ice skating before the war over at Iceland in Sacramento. She had a few friends, and most, you know, they were all Caucasian. And in Stockton, there was an ice rink there too, because she recalls that when she was on her way to the Stockton rink, she heard over the radio that Hawaii was being bombed by the Japanese. And that scared her so much, she turned around and went back home because she wasn't sure what people would do to her, you know, being of Japanese ancestry. But she used to take us 5 kids to the ice rink, and that's where we learned how to skate. And not well, but we weren't as enthusiastic about skating as my mom was, because she was a dancer. She just needed to get out and do that kind of thing, because my father was not into that kind of stuff. And so then eventually, as the years went on, when we were in Japan, I think she must have been at that ice rink every day, because there was a sumo wrestling arena in Tokyo that was converted by the occupation into an ice rink. And so she used to go there all the time, and there was a Japan #1 and #2 male skaters that used to hang around, and she got to dance with them, and she performed before the people of the occupation, and then she got me into that, and she got me into competing. So I had to learn those school figures and do a little solo and compete against those little Japanese girls in Japan. And ice skating was new to them at that time, so I was at an advantage, so to speak. And we used to perform out there on the Nikko ice rink, which was really cold. It was outdoors. And here all these people, Japanese people, were surrounding that ice rink. And do you think I was scared? Oh yeah. My dad was taking movies at that performance, and he also took a nice picture of my fall. I had a nice fall that on that freestyle. But anyway, that was an experience, and I, you know, when I think about it many, many years later, I thank my mother for giving me all these opportunities, because she loved to dance, And eventually she was a square dancer and a round dancer. And she used to make her own costumes. She used to make my costumes, and she was a talented seamstress. She used to make my clothes. And but when I was a young girl, you know how girls are, and you have your friends that wear different kinds of clothes than the ones that your mother used to make. I didn't particularly care for them, but they were very well made and everything. So I'm just kind of dancing around here, but my mother was a very, actually quiet person, and very intelligent. She was very kind, and tried to have control over the siblings, us kids, and pretty much on her own, because she was alone a lot with Dad moving about. So I had a few years with him, and those years I had with him, I always have been happy moments, and never said any unkind things about people. In fact, that's the problem. He never spoke much to Mom, you know, about his business and everything, so she never knew what was going on. And later on might find out about it, you know, about these things. Like in camp when we had to be moved quietly from from Tule Lake because my father's life was in danger. And they were going after the JACL leaders, or those who helped the JACL, or leaders, period, you know, that were pro-American. And so he got out quietly, and then realizing many years later from my uncle that we were still there, but we were protected by the military. I guess they were out there protecting our barracks, you know, until we got out. I didn't know that. And then my mother had to take the train. They escorted her up to the train station with 5 kids, and she had to take that train to Chicago all by herself. And so she did mention in my oral history book that it was scary. We never knew what was going to happen, you know, on that trip over there. There were many trips that she had to take by herself, so she became a very independent person. She says, "It's about time." That's what she said. I remember I interviewed her, you know, and she says, "It's about time they apologize for what they did to us." She was one that never said much anyway. She had a very sad youth. She was the oldest child of 5, and responsibility was put on her shoulder. For what reason, I don't know, because I've interviewed her youngest sister, and I said, "Were you unhappy growing up?" "No." Father treated her very nicely, but my mother was, I guess because she was the oldest child, a lot of responsibility was put on her shoulders. So, and of course, I think maybe my mother might have been one of those kind of gals that spoke back to her parents. I don't know. I don't know what she was like. But she hid everything from us.
So you didn't know about her fears and...
No, she had anger built up, I'm sure, in her mind, but she never revealed it to anybody. She kept all of it to herself, and probably even to Dad. I don't know. But Mom never knew what was going on in his business either. So a lot of Japanese are like that. They don't talk about things that are, it's not that way today, I know. Like Chuck and myself, we don't, you know, we express what we think. But and I guess in the old days, you know, the Japanese were pretty much that way. You don't talk about those things that are really bothering you. And then husbands were always the big boss anyway, right? Yeah.